Okay, let's start out by creating a simple cube. Now I've created one and it sits exactly at the center, and I know that this cube is at its default state, meaning it is in its default transformations, rotations, and scale values. I know that simply by looking at the channel box right here. I see that my translations and rotations are set to 0 and my scale attributes are set to 1. Please remember the default scale attributes are 1, not 0. If you switch your scale to 0, then the object pretty much vanishes. It becomes dimensionless. It has no dimensions whatsoever. So when I say default translate, rotate, and scale values, I'm actually talking about translations and rotations being 0 and scale attributes being 1. So just by looking at the channel box, I know that these attributes are basically in their default state. Now let me go ahead and mess around with it a little bit. Let me say I want the cube to be over here, something like that maybe. And now when I look at this object, I know that it is not in its default state just by looking at the channel box. I know there are all these numbers here. Now what happens if I want this particular translation, rotation, and scale of this cube to be its default state? Meaning the cube will look exactly like this. However, the translations, rotations, and scale attributes will be set to default. Now, before I show you how to do that, I want to talk about why I would want something like this. Take a look at an example maybe. Say, for example, you're creating a control curve for the wrist of your character. Now remember, this controller needs to sit at the wrist. Not only that, that needs to be its default state. The position of the wrist needs to be the default state of that particular controller. If that doesn't happen, if your animator starts to animate it and then realizes, hey, you know what, the animation on the wrist is all wrong and I need to restart it. And how do animators restart animations? They're going to delete the keyframes and they're going to zero out the translations and the rotations, and they'll one out the scale values. And now suddenly what was supposed to be at your wrist has now gone back to the origin, which is not something you wanted. When the animator zeroes out on the translations and the rotations and ones out the scale values, you want this to go here, not here at the origin. Okay, so that's a problem, certainly. So I'm going to Control Z my way back to that big, let me just restart maybe. Start out by creating a cube. Let me just move it out. Let me just rotate it absurdly and also scale it up. Okay, so what I really want is I want this state of the cube to be its default state, which means it needs to look exactly like this, but the channel box needs to be absolutely clean. To do that, select the object and click on Modify, Freeze Transformations, 1, 2, 3. And there you go. All the transformations are cleaned out. So that is freezing transformations.